Welcome to the Organisational Inclusionist. I'm your host, Grace Masuro. In this podcast series, we'll be delving deep into the pressing issues surrounding equality, diversity, and inclusion in both the workplace and the broader world. My goal is to foster understanding, inspire change, and amplify the voices of those advocating for a more inclusive and equitable society. Throughout this series, I'll be engaging in candid discussions with leaders, experts, activists, and changemakers from various fields. We'll explore the challenges, successes, and evolving landscapes of equality, diversity, and inclusion. From dismantling systematic biases to promoting equal opportunities for all, we'll touch on a broad range of topics. But we won't stop at discussing problems. We'll actively seek out solutions and actionable steps to drive positive change. Our aim is to inspire and empower you, our listeners, to take an active role in making the world a better place for everyone. This is the Organisational Inclusionist. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Organisational Inclusionist. My name is Grace Masuro, and today I am joined by Nadia Bob-Thomas. Nadia, thank you so much for joining me today. So what I would love, please, is if you could introduce yourself to our audience. So who is Nadia and what do you do?
Hello, hi Grace. Thank you for having me. My name's Nadia Bob-Thomas. I would say I've been a career civil servant. I left the civil service a few years ago and I joined another public sector body. I work in the blue light sector. I am the head of their DEI team at the moment. And I am very much really ingrained in the DEI sector at the moment, really about equity, especially around Black women and the journey that we go through in the professional spaces. And that is where the focus of my work is at the moment.
Amazing. Thank you for that intro. We met a few weeks back at an event and we sat next to each other, which is just God's favor. And we got talking about something that really, to me, was just like this. We need to get this on a podcast. We need to talk about this. And it was the hidden resume. So let's talk about the hidden resume. Can you elaborate on that concept for our listeners? How do you define it? And why is it so integral to a Black woman's career journey? Or why is it such an integral part of our journey?
Okay, so I'm still working on exploring the definition of this hidden resume. So I'll go with it and I'll see where we get to. So I don't believe I've discovered anything new or profound, but it's a concept that came to me while I was participating in another podcast discussing another concept called the secret resume. And that was explained to me as being a collection of key people, places, experiences that shapes who you are and that sits behind your professional CV. And it's kind of like shapes the mask that we all wear in professional spaces. So while I was engaging in that conversation, I was suddenly conscious that I was filtering an already secret resume and experiences beyond what I was relaying to the podcast post. And so, besides being quite distracting, so I was having multiple conversations in my mind, it actually made me want to explore further what I was what consciously kind of filtering these subconscious issues. Like, what are these issues that I was filtering? And also, why did I feel the need to even want to filter them during this session? So, when I really broke it down, in preparation for this podcast, actually, when I really broke it down, and these are still early reflections, but I think the conclusions that I've arrived at is the concept of the hidden resume, I'd say, really speaks to the intersectionality of our identities and how we at times compartmentalize and present different aspects of self depending on the audience and the context. So obviously we understand intersectionality to be a framework developed by Kimberly Crenshaw in the late 80s. And in a nutshell, what she wants to do is differentiate the experiences of Black women from what she thought was a dominant white feminative narrative at the time, which lacked the insights of the realities of the Black women who faced multiple forms of discrimination beyond gender and obviously centered around their race. So I think in a nutshell, that was what I was doing. So how does this relate to the concept of hidden resume? So, and why is it important to acknowledge? So I think really why it really is important to acknowledge, and I think this is what I got from it, is that through our professional spaces, we as Black women need to be aware of how many different hats we really do wear when we are navigating those spaces. And we need to be aware of the impact of us doing that on how we are received, how we advance through those spaces, and also personally how they may even affect our well-being.
Yeah. So it's so huge. And I think it's interesting, like when you first introduced the secret resume and how it talks about kind of, the different people, etc., that potentially impact your journey. I think for us as Black women, and it's something we're going to go into in a bit more detail in a second, but I think from my perspective, there's a lot of stuff that we are kind of working through and unlearning on a day to day. And a lot of that is traumatic experiences that we've had in our lives, whether it be instances of racism, overt or covert discrimination that we've experienced, misconceptions, stereotypes, etc., and how those impact our journey as well, and that hidden resume piece. So from your perspective, again, how does the hidden resume reflect the lived experiences of Black women in professional spaces? And have you got any examples of moments when you've had to mask parts of your identity to navigate workplace dynamics?
Okay, so if I start with my moments of navigating the spaces, the way I try to approach and explore this issue is to look at whether when I step into a room of my white peers, whether my greater othering feature is my race or my gender. And from my
Mm,
experience, I have to say it's my race over my gender. And that is a dominant factor of my identity in the Western world. So
yeah.
why this is important is because when we speak of masking, I think that's the greatest aspect of my identity that I think I've had to compromise on more throughout my career over my gender. My gender seems to have not played, I don't feel, that much of a factor. If I step into a room with white peers, I don't find I have a greater alliance to white women in a room over anybody else.
Mm,
That's not the biggest factor. So really, I think what we're kind of talking about here is probably about the typical stereotypes of the Black woman, which is so kind of unique to our experiences. So we're talking about things like our hair, our attire, our
mm,
voice, which includes things like code switching or the volume of our voice, and just our overall presence and how we are just appear in the room. So I think sometimes people kind of want to counteract this argument to say, well, actually, no, you're just showing up as a professional in a professional space. But I think what I'm talking about really is actually going beyond that to the extent that your identity is being both
mm,
policed and politicized. And so if I break
yeah.
that down, let's talk about hair. So I right now largely wear my hair natural styles, Afro styles. But I've worked and I've worn weaves, straight weaves in the past. It's a personal choice, whatever. But right now I wear my hair natural styles. But I remember a time in the past where um I wore my afro out for the first time, and a colleague who was a friend who actually asked me whether I'd make a political statement. And in that moment, it was so unexpected, and the
Yeah.
environment didn't feel like a particularly hostile environment. I felt I was actually thriving in that environment. But at that point, I felt so othered in that moment that it kind of made me
Mm,
step back and feel, wow, if I can feel like I'm thriving in this environment, but yet someone who I think is a friend can actually look at me, look at my hair, and ask me whether I'm making a political statement because I'm just wearing my hair natural. It really kind of like sank in. I really kind of had to like make that sink in and think more about that. And actually, from that day, I don't think I've ever not worn my afro. So I thought, if this is a political statement you see, then that's what you see. But this is me. And then if we also go to kind of like voice, I think voice is so important, especially working in DEI space. How we use our voice is so important, and it's our biggest tool that we have as well. But we all know about the angry Black woman trope that's out there, and that kind of polices again and politicizes how you use your voice in a professional space. And
absolutely.
I think it's actually kind of like one of the kind of outcomes from the pet to threat concept, which is about, and there's a really good graphic out there that illustrates it, but it's the process of a black hire transitioning from an agreeable, non-threatening pet who is viewed as being, who then transitions to the threat because there's then kind of, as they find their voice, they're seen as being a competitor, being a challenge, and not quite the cultural
Mm,
fit for the organization. And I think that's where probably the hidden resume comes into play, because I think the hidden resume probably speaks to when maybe you're being a pet and you're remaining in that pet stage, and there's things you're doing to kind of police yourself and remain under the radar and remain kind of appeasable to the organization to be that culture fit. And when you're trying to survive in a more psychological unsafe space of threat, when you are seen as a threat, and actually what are you doing to police yourself there to say, okay, maybe I'm a threat, how am I being threatening, what do I do to like change, or how am I using myself in this space? So I think it's talking to how you police yourself to kind of navigate those perceptions of who you are.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting as well. I completely agree. I think that one of the things that I'm very mindful of in the work that I do, and I talk a lot about kind of my work and just some of the things that I think and some of the lived experiences, that I've had, and also people that look like me. But I'm connected to a number of people, and I have friends that work in diversity and inclusion. And some of the posts that they share, the language that they use in terms of, they can be quite forceful and really telling off, because they're white women. And so they have almost the freedom to speak in a way that I couldn't dare. And sometimes I read those posts and I get scared, almost like I've written it and I'm expecting the backlash that would come if I put a post out like that. And considering the lived experience that we have as a people in the West, the right really does sit with us to be angry, but we don't have the freedom to do that. And one of the things that I definitely find myself doing to make myself palatable and to make my content palatable is toning down what I'm saying and reading it and making sure that what I'm delivering is delivered with love and doesn't sound like a telling off and doesn't sound, like a chastisement, because I know how that will be received because of the color of my skin. And I think that's something that you said as well around, when we look at our, kind of the visible protected characteristics that we have, we're Black and we're women. Being a woman, again, I'd agree with you. I don't feel like that has been the thing that's held me back in life or in my career or impacts me on a day to day. The first thing that people see is that's a Black person, and then they see that that's a Black woman. And I just, I think it's really important to call that out. And we see that as well. I've seen a lot of posts and a lot of backlash against white women in the States, and talking about the fact that, we're clearly not united as a gender because, look, it was the Black women that voted against Trump. They were the ones that voted for women's rights. And we see that, again, with the fact that Kimberly Crenshaw had to coin intersectionality to teach people about the fact that actually the Black woman's experience is very, very different. And these are the things we need you to be aware of if we're trying to affect the change that we want to see. So yeah, I completely agree. But there's so much to dissect with this. And I think that it's such a heavy reality for us as Black women that it is something that we need to talk about. In every conversation I have, I am constantly self-regulating and constantly mindful of what I say, and the fact that the world isn't forgiving of me as a Black woman. I don't have that freedom to just make mistakes, which we make as human beings, and I think it's just so important to call that out. So thank you for that.
Can I also thank you, because I think every so often something happens in life that reminds you who you are. So I've worked in a DEI space, and in my DEI space, I have to look after everybody. So I'm not there as a Black woman looking after the needs of the Black groups and the female groups. It's everybody. Having to kind of prepare for this podcast and go through this and really think about this and boil it down, it made me realize actually as a Black woman, you have needs that are different from other groups. And actually you've been parking them, and you do need to make sure that your needs are met. And just to fully answer your question about masking, I have to say that I have masked throughout many times throughout my career, as I think we all have. And also the added complexity to masking is the fact that I'm a member of the West African diaspora. So I schooled in the UK in the 80s and 90s into the workplace in the noughties, and every year annually we have gone home because even though I'm third generation, my family still call Africa home. And so I've experienced issues with my identity all throughout my life. And I've learned pretty quickly not all aspects of my Black identity was decided in the workplace. So I've had to navigate and shift who I am whenever, wherever I kind of like appear in different places. So it's an ongoing thing. But I will say that the me that I am now, I make it very clear to hiring companies that what they see is what they're getting. And I think that part
Mm,
of the masking is gone. I mean, it's just way too tiring. And I think we're in a space now, luckily, where we can talk about things. And so because of the sector I work in and because I think of the times, I think it is more not, I don't want to say acceptable, but it's less of a challenge for me to be me. I don't think organizations, I think you still get the pet to threat, but it's still less of a challenge in the early stages for me to present fully as I want to present.
yeah, no, absolutely. So, one of the things that I'm really big, and it's a message I'm trying to drive home to any and everyone that I engage with doing this work, is that, you know, us as Black people and people from marginalized groups need to be leading this conversation in the sense that we are the only ones that understand what our lived experience is, right? So we are the only ones that should be speaking to that. But I do also appreciate that affinity bias exists in this world, and that in order for us to make the change that we need to, particularly in anti-racism work, we need white people talking about this and speaking to each other about it, because people find it easier to listen to and to embrace information and lessons from people that look like them to a certain
Mhm.
extent. I love, love, love the allies that I have in my life and that I work with and that I know. But I feel like allyship often seems absent or insufficient for Black professionals. How has the lack of allyship impacted your journey, and what does true allyship look like in addressing some of the insidious workplace moments that we've experienced?
Okay, so I think I don't know. I think I'm a little bit more unforgiving and a little frustrated when it comes to allyship a little bit. So whenever I read definitions of allyship, I actually get quite bored because essentially to me it's a bunch of words on a paper. For me, allyship is a verb,
Mm,
it's an action. You do it, you
doing.
do it. So for me, the first rule of allyship should be, I had to make rules for this. So the first rule of allyship should be that you should not ask a person from an underrepresented group on how, for instructions on how to be an ally, because for me, that is the job, that is the homework that needs to be done. It's the burden. That is the burden you're removing away from the group you're being an ally of. You are supposed to be using your privilege, your influence, your resources to support and advocate. And part of that, I think, requires some independent and critical thought. And so you take that away and you do that. Okay. So, and I think the second rule of allyship is, for me, this is one that really grates me. You don't seek, it's not to seek validation for any acts of allyship. Too often I see people or groups congratulating themselves for doing things that haven't even scratched the
Yeah.
surface. So a lot of people think reading a book to raise their awareness of certain issues is allyship. I mean, to some extent it is. I think it does help to shift the dial a little bit, but how is you reading a book helping anyone else's experiences? You have to act upon the new knowledge that you have. So
Mm,
it's about, like I said, it's about really doing. But I think, to be fair, that being said, one thing that I've kind of learned over the years is that it's really difficult to outsource something that's not understood. And for the most part, I think people really don't understand what it is to be an ally, and I get that. I do think there are a lot of great potential allies out there who are absolutely lost on what to do. And I think for them, what
mm,
I'll say is to follow their guts, because usually allyship is actually being in a room knowing something in that was said or done that was not right, but for some reason they don't act. So I would say act. Do a micro disruption of whatever you thought was happening, so people know that actually what they did is being registered somewhere else is actually not being right. Because, well, however small the act is, it would be something that will move the dial.
mm,
So for me, I think the greatest acts of allyship, I probably haven't been in a room when they've happened because I shouldn't be, because you're acting in my absence. So therefore, it should be something that's happened when I've not been there. So I don't know if I should actually know about those issues, because allyship is thankless task, it's uncomfortable,
mm,
it's challenging the status quo, it may alienate you from your peers, it's going to be challenging. But ultimately, do I always have to? Will I know? No, I won't. So I don't like, if I'm honest with you, Grace, I actually don't like to thank people for doing what I think is morally right and for doing something which actually is just. And I probably don't really. It's like just you do it. It's something that's felt. If I feel a shift in my experiences is becoming more positive, then I should probably know, okay, there are some allies out there. But I just don't think I felt enough of a seismic shift to say, you know, it's working for us all. It might work for one or two of us or the odd one because we have a good relationship with one person. But as a collective, we're not getting a collective kind of action being taken on our behalf enough of the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can't remember where I read it, but it was basically talking about the fact that Black women are over mentored and under sponsored. And I think for me, that is that is such a pivotal statement that relates to allyship. Because for me, allyship is about mentoring, but sponsorship for me is the action piece. Like you see the disproportionality in investment in Black businesses, in Black female businesses in particular. You see sometimes the lack of career progression. You see exploitation in the form of, Black people being invited to speak at panels and events, but not being offered to be paid. And for me, the allyship is when you, as a white person who's in that space, is asking those questions on the behalf of Black people who might not feel like they can ask those questions, is actually, if I'm being paid, can I just ask, is everybody else being paid? And, if you're in a room where opportunities are being discussed and you know that actually you've got some great Black people or Black women in your network who aren't being considered, but you know that they could do that opportunity, are you putting those people forward? And I think that's really important. I think for me in my career, I've actually not experienced enough mentorship. I've got an amazing mentor now, but what I found in my career is that I had to ask for mentorship. It wasn't something that was ever offered. And I actually encourage people to do that. Like if you want to be mentored, or if you want a mentor, particularly if you're from an underrepresented group, or if you're a Black woman in particular, if you see someone who you admire, ask that person to be your mentor, because they're not necessarily seeing themselves that way. And people very, very rarely say no to being a mentor. But I think the biggest thing my biggest call out to anyone listening here and, feeling like, well, I don't know how to be an ally. I need you to now be a sponsor. Like take that next step and think about, how can I impact the lived experience of Black women in the workplace or in business or just in the world, really? Like what part can you play to that? I personally, in the work that I'm doing and some of the conversations that I've had, I've seen an increase in people talking about, wanting mentors with lived experience of marginalization, as well as, mentors that don't have it, but more on the lived experience piece. When we first spoke, you mentioned mentoring or coaching requests kind of coming from a bit of a cry for help. People are kind of hitting brick walls. They don't know how to navigate their careers. They don't know how to get that next step in their careers, for example, having different challenges and crying out for mentors that understand, that get it. Can you share a pivotal moment when mentorship shaped your path? And how can we create systems where the support is proactive rather than reactive, which is what I just spoke about, the fact that, I've had to ask for mentorship. It's not something that has been offered necessarily.
Right. So I'm gonna say this. It's gonna fly a little bit in against your question. So for me myself, I've only ever entered into one formal mentoring arrangement, and it was with a white woman. And I didn't pick her because she was a woman. I actually picked her because I admired her intelligence, I admired her diplomacy, and the way she navigated office politics. I wanted to learn from her. I'd never worked with her directly, so all this admiration from afar, but I felt she was someone I could trust and learn a lot from. So I didn't, in that instance, see any benefit from having to add a layer of race in this particular situation, because I felt as though I can have those conversations in so many other different kind of areas with friends, family, colleagues to to kind of unpick any issues of race in the workplace. But with this mentoring relationship, it was about developing my competencies, my critical thinking, my problem solving skills. And never once did we start a conversation with, as a woman, how did you navigate X, Y, and Z? Because I didn't feel that's necessary. So the reason why I'm saying that is because I feel so. I was reading a report that's released recently by McKenzie, and it's about women in the
Mm.
workplace. And what they kind of stated was that the composition of women for underrepresented groups fell relatively compared to other groups at every level in the organization and was acutely worse at senior levels. And the greatest barrier was the kind of the first promotion to manager. So what you had was not only a pipeline issue, but was also under representation at the top and over representation at the bottom. So what this
Mm.
does as a group, it then what we have to understand from this is the fact that unlike our white peers who have representation at every level, and we know when you go for progression, the path to promotion starts way before the formal promotion round, through social events and networks. But we don't have those same structures in place. And what I find we're doing, we're putting an awful amount of pressure on the people at the top who have made it against all odds, seen untold challenges at the top, and the majority of us at the bottom, have really focused on the scarcity of resources at the top, asking for mentoring and coaching. And I don't actually believe that is a workable solution. I think it's an unfair burden to give to the Black woman at the top. And I feel as though we
Mm.
have to probably think about it and approach it in a different way. Um, One of
Mm.
the things, I have a background in international relations and development, and one of the things that concepts in that field is about the savior complex and the dependency that creates a dependency culture. And what that
Mhm.
talks to is the recognition that in the international charity sector, they've created an unintended consequence of because of a dependency culture in some areas of their work, as they're seen as saviors to like various plights that have happened in certain developing nations. Obviously they're going in with all these solutions. They're not giving people a chance to
Mm.
actually empower themselves and work things out themselves. So, and I've noticed there's some behaviors in our groups which have mirrored this. And one of the solutions I always advocate is the need to organize and self empower. There's a lot that we can do as a group. So, one thing I really highly advocate is action learning sets, because a lot of our issues are quite similar. So, what an action learning set is literally the process of coming together as a group and working collaboratively to reflect on like real world challenges, be it professional issues, a specific issue, development, and take meaningful, explore solutions, work together, explore solutions, and create meaningful actions and hold each other accountable. And what this creates critical thinking and organization within the majority. And what you can then do, you can then pull on your mentors, your senior mentors, and your senior coaches to come into the group and work with you as a group. And there you kind of share that resource rather than it being one to one all the time. All the time, it actually doesn't need to be one to one all the time. There's a lot that we can
Mm.
do as a group. And I feel that if I had a group that approached me with that kind of approach, I'll be far likely and excited to work with them, because actually they are working on solutions before they come to me, and they will already have an approach that I'm tapping into, rather than coming with an empty slate and saying, well, this is my problem, which probably most other people have. Can you help me with a solution? And I feel that we
Mm.
really have to probably start getting into that space where we are empowering ourselves, and when taking on the narrative from the oppressive systems around us that tells us we can't do this, we can't do that, we're not empowered, we're invisible. Actually, redefine that narrative and say, no, I'm empowered, I'm going to do this, and really kind of like shape your own destiny. I want to see a lot more of that happening. And I think that would then really kind of reinvigorate the mentoring and coaching space, because it won't just be a one-way process, it'll be a two-way it'll be a multi-way process actually, because not only is it up and down, you're also helping each other. And I think that is really what we need to get a lot better at doing, creating our own informal networks that actually can help to deliver formal solutions to some of our problems that we're facing.
No, amazing. And I agree, actually. I think that is such a great call to action to end this episode on, is creating those action learning sets. I was at an event last week and they talked about the fact that we can't expect other people to save us because it's not necessarily in their interest. And it's really important that we take that power back. And, that's why I think as well, the work that we all individually need to do around unlearning what we've been taught about ourselves and who we are as a race and where we place on the hierarchy, etc., is a big part of that empowerment that we need to do as well. Thank you so much, Nadia. And I actually feel like you should get started on creating a few of these action learning sets, just saying. But
And I will.
Yeah.
I'll let you know. I absolutely will.
Please, I'm going to watch this space. I'm really, really excited. Thank you so much for joining me, Nadia. Thank you for this conversation and being open to having it.
Thank you for your time. All the best for everything, Grace. Thank you.